What's up, everybody? This is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. And today I'm going to be bringing you the Legend of Korra episode 4 review entitled The Voice in the Night. Now, before I get into this episode review, let me just go over a couple of things. First, get ready for another longish episode review. And I have to do this because these episodes are just so dense. And I have so much respect for, the show and for the writers. And I really love this show. I really like the show. And I think I would be doing myself a disservice. I would be doing this show a disservice. And I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't bring, my A game when it comes to, analyzing these episodes, because a lot of this stuff is a little bit subtle, and you might, not catch the full impact of it if you don't, watch over it very carefully. And, I wouldn't understand it half as well as I do if I didn't, pay attention and analyze the episodes. So again, thanks for watching, my episode reviews, because, they are, pretty long, and, but I checked, my audience retention, and, a significant, portion of you guys are, sticking in there. So thanks for, bearing with these, longish episode reviews. Second thing I want to touch on before I get into this episode review. Tenzin probably lied to Korra. And this is something that other people brought up, but that I had missed at the end of that last episode. I'm almost certain that Tenzin lied to Korra when he said that Aang is the only one who has the ability, or Aang is the only one who is supposed to have the ability to, take away somebody else's ability to bend. And the reason why you can tell he lied is because if you go back to that scene at the end of episode 3, when Korra reveals to him what she knows about Amon's ability, Tenzin shifts his eyes like this. His eyes go back and forth, and he says, well, that's impossible. You could, and anybody who, trained in lie detection, like if you have, little brothers or sisters, or if you're around kids, one of the first things you'll notice is that when you try to look someone in the eye and ask them a question and their eyes start shifting, that's a very good indication that they're lying, because it's an indication of stress. And that's kind of nerdy and geeky, but, that's how you can tell when somebody's lying. Also, now that I've seen this episode, I'm going to have, sort of a speculation that Tenzin's lie to Korra about who has the ability to take away somebody else's ability to bend might be related to Yukon. And I'll sort of explain that as I go throughout this episode review. Yukon is the person that Charlock mentioned during, when he was, giving his proposal for taking care of Amon. Also, a lot of you guys seem to have thought that Korra was going to lose her ability to bend. I knew from Jump Street that wasn't going to happen. That would just be, from a narrative standpoint, it would be completely incompetent. Think about it. If there's only 12 episodes in this first season, and if Korra loses her ability to bend in the 4th season, then that means that there's only 8 episodes left. And we already know that the name of this book is Air. So we know that she's supposed to master airbending at the end of this book. That means it would be 8 episodes left for Korra to lose her bending ability, relearn her bending, and then master airbending in 8 episodes. That ain't going to happen. Come on, seriously. That just was not going to happen. And you could probably tell, given the structure of the episodes and given the structure of this arc. So I just knew that wasn't going to happen. So now let me get into this episode review. And first, let me start off a little bit unorthodox. And I just want to give a quick character analysis and a sort of character comparison between Korra and Amon. So this is supposed to be, a sort of analytical overview of their sort of narrative position so far. One thing that I've realized is that there is a real danger that Amon could completely overshadow Korra when it comes to who's the most interesting and intriguing and the most complex character in this series. And the reason why I say that is because Korra feels very, very cliche. And I know I've said this before, that, it was a little bit too early to tell, and that at some point the writers would have to give a more, full explication of why it is that Korra is the way she is. But I think that when you juxtapose Korra to Amon, her characterization is woefully lacking, even though we got a lot of characterization on Korra's part in this episode. Like I said before, we've seen male protagonists who have, portrayed this tough guy image or this tough guy act, and, they're very, very aggressive, and that as the series moves on, their character development tends to mellow them out. And we've seen this in male protagonists, but not so much in female protagonists. And so I said, I thought that was a very good thing that the writers chose a female protagonist and chose to portray her in this way. But like I said, we've seen this line of character development before. And since we've seen it so much, even if we haven't seen it for a female protagonist, it makes Korra's character development extremely predictable. And it just makes her less of an interesting and less of an intriguing character. Amon, on the other hand, is a full-fledged character. He has goals, he has purposes, he has objectives, he has an entire political ideology based on the way he's analyzed the Avatar world. I mean, just even if I stop there, Amon would be a more interesting character than Korra, but it doesn't stop there. We also know that he's sort of skirting the line between villain and antagonist. And like I said in my previous episode review, at this point, it's not even clear to me that Amon is a real villain. The only thing we know about Amon at this point is that he's an antagonist, but we don't know if he's a villain or not. We also know that he has this messiah complex, which from a psychological standpoint makes him a much more interesting character than Korra. We also know that he might be either a justifiable villain if it turns out he's a villain, or a justifiable antagonist if he's not actually a villain. We know that he's actually a vigilante. I mean, a person who goes through the trouble of abducting the leader of the triads to take away his bending ability on behalf of other people. Now, of course, he may have some ulterior motives, but at this point, on behalf of other people who he wants to protect, I mean, that makes him, like I said before, he takes on a Punisher role. I mean, he's basically a vigilante, without the killing at this point. But not only that, based on what I've seen throughout, the previous episode and this episode, we can also see that Amon has a very adept understanding of politics, of social psychology, and of sociology more generally. At this point, it's clear to say that he's not your average, run-of-the-mill, predictable villain or antagonist. Whereas if we juxtapose him to Korra, Korra is extremely predictable in terms of her character development and what we can expect in terms of her characterization. So at this point, there is a very serious danger that Amon could completely overshadow Korra when it comes to who's the more interesting and more intriguing character. So now let me get into my summary and sort of analysis of this episode in particular. The episode opens up with Korra having nightmares about Amon. And of course, even though you're the Avatar, if you're a bender, and you know that the foe that you have to face has the ability to take away your most powerful weapon, which is your bending, if I was the Avatar, I'd be kind of scared too. And basically, this whole scene sets up, Korra's psychological frailty, and it's designed to show, some deeper aspects of her psychology and therefore some deeper aspects of her characterization. And it's very, very clear throughout this episode that she's, just scared shitless. I mean, there's this one scene where Amon comes on the radio and she hears Amon speaking. She doesn't even see him. She hears him speaking and she starts sweating profusely. So like I said, it's obvious that she's, just scared shitless. And this sort of, her fear of Amon would later, lay the foundation for, her challenge to Amon, which is, the reason why she decides to challenge Amon to a duel, because, it's typical of people who, have this sort of psychological profile. Their initial reaction to fear is to attack first, to, react aggressively. And this is precisely how, how Korra's, character plays out throughout this episode. And it's really just this opening scene is really just a prologue to set the stage for those later developments in the episode. But before I move on, let me just say this about the Mako subplot in this episode. I found it to be very, very silly and very, very contrived. It just seemed silly to me. And here's why. Mako's walking across the street and he gets hit by a woman on a moped. This woman winds up taking him to dinner, buying him new clothes, and then her father just happens to be the maker of the Sodomobile. The Sodomobile in the Avatar world is basically the equivalent of our Ford Model T, the first mass-produced consumer, automobile. And her father, Hiroshi Sato, is the maker of the Sodomobile, and he just happens to give the Firefarers 30,000 wands. So imagine this. Imagine that you're walking across the street, you get hit by a woman on a moped, her father turns out to be rich, and he gives you $30,000. I mean, from a narrative standpoint, that sounds incredibly contrived. So there's two possibilities. Either one, this is poor writing, because this is, again, terribly contrived. Or two, it's designed to be suspicious so that it lays the foundation for a later revelation or a later development in the series. And because I have so much faith in the writing and the people who, write these episodes, I think it's probably number two. So, and I don't have, any idea about what this would lay the foundation for. But I'm hoping it's number two rather than number one. Otherwise, it would just be, narratively contrived and silly. But the rest of the episode basically deals with, Tarlok, who's a representative on the United Republic Council, developing this proposal to take on Amon, and basically lays the foundation for how the United Republic Council will continue to deal with Amon as a threat. So the cuts to this scene with, the United Republic Council has this meeting and they're debating about Tarlok's proposal to take on Amon. And, they really understand now that this is serious shit, right? Because they understand that, if Amon has the ability to take away somebody's bending, then that makes him, potentially a serious threat to, the United, Republic of Nations, but also, every bender out there. And this scene really shows the sort of inner workings of the political structure of the United Republic of Council, and, of the United Republic of Nations. United Republic of Council is the governing body of the United Republic of Nations. And for those of you who don't know, it's basically comprised of one representative from each nation. Earth, air, fire, and then there's one from the Northern Water Tribe and one from the Southern Water Tribe. So there's 5 representatives in total. And they're, like I said, they're debating about how to deal with, the Amon threat. And Tarlok, who's from the Northern Water Tribe, the representative from the Northern Water Tribe, develops this proposal. And his proposal is to create a task force that's designed to capture Amon and, what he says, bring him to justice, basically stop his threat to society. And for those of you who know anything about the Navy SEALs of America, it's basically, the way the Navy SEALs took out bin Laden. Create an elite task force, go hunt down Amon, capture him, and bring him to justice. And there's this debate, a sort of, significant debate between Tenzin and Tarlok that develops. And Tenzin's opposed to this proposal. And the reason why is because he believes that creating this task force to take on the Chi blockers, the Equalists, and to take on, Amon will only create more political tension and it will only make the situation more unstable. But Tarlok's counter argument is that, Amon poses a serious threat to society and that he needs to be apprehended immediately. And this is the point at which he mentions, Yukon. He says that, Avatar Aang never faltered when he went after Yukon and stopped him, basically nipped that threat in the bud. So this is where Yukon comes from. And I agree with Tarlok. And I know to some of you that might seem surprising, but here's why I agree with Tarlok's proposal. I don't agree with Tarlok because I think that the proposal is just. I simply don't know enough about the Avatar world to know whether or not, Tarlok is just or whether or not Amon is just. Because we simply don't know if Amon's claims are true that, the benders in this world have a disproportionate amount of political influence and political power. Although there's some hint that that may in fact be true, but we're not sure about that yet. The reason why, so I don't agree with Tarlok's proposal because I believe the proposal is just. I agree with his proposal because, one, it's the political obligation of a government to, secure the stability of society. That's the primary, political obligation of any government. And Amon threatens that stability. Therefore, the government has to react to to Amon's threat and to sort of quell that threat in order to reestablish the stability of society. But the second reason why I agree with Tarlok, and this is the most important reason, is that if the government in fact believes that Amon is unjust, then this is the only practical solution to dealing with that threat. Because Amon is the type of person who cannot be negotiated with. I mean, Amon, we already see that Amon is willing to engage in violence in order to change the political structure of society, and not just the political structure of society, but to change the very nature of society, because he wants to get rid of bending completely. He just wants to abolish it, wipe it out completely. And so he's the type of person who you cannot negotiate with. He is engaging in violence. And we have a name for people who are political revolutionaries. They may be political revolutionaries. We have a name for these people. We call them terrorists, right? At this point, Amon is a terrorist. He's engaging in violence against society, and he doesn't seem like the type of person who you can negotiate with. So again, if the government actually believes that Amon is just, and if they're justified in believing that Amon is unjust, then it seems like this is the only practical solution to dealing with the problem, because you can't negotiate with a person like Amon. So let me do a quick analysis of justice. And I don't want to get, too philosophical here. No, I'm not trying to make a video, about, the nature of justice. No, that's not what I'm doing. But I think it's very interesting that Tarlok and the people in the United Republic of Council, and this includes Tenzin, I think it's very interesting that they're using this, this phrase, bring Amon to justice. And in this context, it's kind of difficult to understand precisely what justice means, because you have two political factions, both of which who think they're just, but as the viewer, you don't have enough information to decide who's just and who's unjust. And so the fundamental question of this series will be, is the Avatar world really unjust because because benders have a disproportionate amount of political power and political influence compared to non-benders? Because if that's true, it would completely change the nature of this entire series, because it would show that Amon is in fact not only a justifiable antagonist, and it may turn out that he's a villain, that he would not just be a justifiable antagonist or a justifiable villain, but it would put the viewer in the awkward position of having to sympathize and in fact identify more with the antagonist / villain than with the protagonist. And that would be a very, very interesting development. And so again, the entire nature of this series hinges on the question of whether or not within the Avatar world, benders have an unjust amount of power compared to non-benders. And there's two aspects of villainy. So we have to deal with that fundamental question first, but we also have to deal with the fact that there's two fundamental aspects of what makes a villain. A villain is generally an evil protagonist. That's the most general, idea of a villain. But there's two ways that a villain can be evil. The first way is that their ends could be evil. Their objectives could be evil, their goals could be evil, the things that they want to accomplish could be evil. Like, for example, Fire Lord Ozai wanted to be the emperor of the entire world and wanted to oppress other people. Those goals were evil. But there's another way that a villain could be evil. The second way is that their means are evil. So their objectives, their goals, the things that they want to accomplish could in fact be good. It could be just, but the methods that they use, the tactics could be evil. For example, if Amon said, you know what, I want to get rid of, the government of the United Republic of Nations. So what I'm going to do is drop a nuclear warhead. I'm just making this up. This is just hypothetical. I want to drop a nuclear warhead and kill, hundreds of thousands of people. Even if it turns out that Amon is right and that his goal is just, his means of doing it would undoubtedly be evil, because he'd have to, kill a whole bunch of people in order to get to that goal. So, like I said, the first thing we have to do is answer the fundamental question about whether the Avatar world is unjust or just, and then that will allow us to make a determination about, whether or not Amon's goals are in fact just or unjust. And then we'd have to learn more about precisely what his methods and tactics are. We know that he wants to take away people's, ability to bend, but I think that the question of, taking away people's ability to bend, it's debatable about whether or not that makes Amon evil. And so again, I think Aman is sort of straddling the line between villainy and between being an antagonist. And from what I can see, the most important, aspects of this series will be, the politics. I mean, it's just no way you can get around the politics of this series. All right. So Tarlok, after, Tarlok's proposal winds up being passed, and so they do create this task force to go out and to try and apprehend, the Equalists, and to also apprehend Amon. And Tarlok decides to recruit Korra, and at first she refuses, because it's obvious that she's scared of Amon, but then she's manipulated into joining. And Tarlok really is, insidious in this way, that he uses her fear and hubris against her to manipulate her into doing what he wants her to do. And this is obviously laying the groundwork for, Korra's characterization and character development as the series goes on, because as Tenzin warned her, he said, if you're scared and if you're fearful and if you don't deal with that fear, then you'll be thrown out of balance. And so this is really the beginning of Korra taking the first steps to learn the spiritual aspects of bending and to learn to, fully be a balanced avatar. And at the end of the episode, she breaks down, which is, sort of the beginning of that process. And as the episode continues, we see that her pride continues to get the best of her, and eventually it culminates in her challenging Amon. And it's very interesting how this plays out, because Amon pulls a Miyamoto Musashi. For those of you who don't know Miyamoto Musashi, he was a very, very famous samurai, and one of the tactics that he used to employ is that sometimes when he got into a duel with a person, he would set a specific date and a specific time, but he would show up late. And the strategy and the thinking behind that is if you show up late, then it produces anxiety and anxiousness in your opponent, and it sort of unnerves them. And this is precisely what happens. Korra, challenges Amon, and she, tells him to meet her on Air Memorial Island at 12 o'clock. And it appears that Amon never shows up. And so Korra, lowers her defenses. And when she does so, Amon traps her. He captures her. He has his chi blockers temporarily disable her bending ability. And this is a very, 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 very important aspect of this episode. And it's a very, 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 very important aspect of Amon's characterization and his character development. He has Korra at his mercy. And it looks like he's going to take away her ability to bend. But then he stops and he says, you know what? I could ensure that you would not be a problem for me in the future right now. I could take away your ability to bend, but I won't do that. And the reason why is because if I do that right now, you will only become a martyr. And it would make it harder for me to persuade people to come to my side. It would make it harder for me to, rally people behind my political ideology. And so I'm not going to take away your ability to bend. This really shows that Amon is a political genius. I mean, there's, frequently throughout, series like this, we see where the villain has the opportunity, the villain or the antagonist has the opportunity to defeat the protagonist, but they'll say something cheesy like, I want you to suffer, or I know you'll never be able to defeat me, so I won't even bother with, finishing you off. But this is very, very different from those sort of cheesy, narrative plot devices. Because Amon, we actually see that he has a purpose, a motivation, that there's actually a strategy behind his political ideology. That's just amazing characterization. That's just amazing writing. And it gives us an actual, believable reason for why Amon is not going to take out Korra at this point. I mean, like I said before, this really shows that Amon has a very, very adept understanding of politics, of group psychology, and of sociology. And this is why I said at the beginning that there's a very serious, there's a very real danger that Amon as a character could just completely overshadow Korra. This is a real danger that, the writers are going to have to contend with, I think, going forward. One final point, and this is going to be a point about Amon's identity. Early in the episode, and I made an allusion to this before, Tarlok mentions Yukon. Now, when Amon, knocks Korra out, when he gets her, he knocks her out and then he leaves. And then Tenzin comes to, Air Memorial Island to try and, come to get Korra after she's been knocked out. And then there's this flashback and it shows Sokka, it shows Toph, it shows Aang, and he appears to be in a courtroom. And then it shows a very ominous figure. Now, from what I can tell, this figure probably isn't Amon. And I say that because the figure at this point is already, looks like he's about 40, 50 years old. And this happened 42 years ago. So the idea that it could be Amon is probably not plausible from a narrative standpoint because Amon doesn't appear to be, 80 years old. But it could be possible that Amon is somehow related to this, that this ominous figure could be Yukon, and that Amon could be related to Yukon somehow, and that the motivation for him wanting to take away bending has to do with this conflict between Yukon and Aang. And so I'm not quite sure about that, but it seems like a plausible ulterior motive, and it also would explain why the flashback occurs at this specific time. Because, it doesn't seem, from a narrative standpoint, it doesn't seem relevant that there would be this flashback at this point in time after we see Amon, knock out Korra and then leave. And so I think that this ominous figure might be Yukon, and that Amon might be related to this ominous Yukon figure that Aang took out, and that could be his motivation behind wanting to get rid of bending. But that's just a speculation, and I don't even think it's a prediction because, like I said, it's just speculation. But very, very great episode. I'm really loving this series. So, this is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, just the analysis. Peace and have a blessed day.